The Galactic Council slaughtered millions. Humanity struck back with fire. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie, orange glow over the once thriving human colony of Viridian. Towering cities, green fields, and peaceful lakes had made the planet a symbol of human growth and harmony. But that peace was shattered in an instant. From the silent depths of space, the Galactic Council's fleet descended on the planet, unprovoked and merciless. Captain Alara Turner, a seasoned war veteran, stood on the observation deck of the UEF flagship Aegis, staring out at the devastation. Her heart sank as she watched the once pristine surface of Viridian slowly turn to ruin. The Council had declared war on humanity, but not the way anyone expected. No formal declaration, no demands, just a brutal attack. The Council's fleets, led by a monstrous battleship, unleashed their weapons on the peaceful human colonies, decimating entire cities in a matter of hours. Ilara's eyes narrowed as she saw flashes of light on the horizon, plumes of smoke rising from her home, the place where she had grown up. The attack wasn't just on the people of Viridian, it was an assault on everything humanity had built. The Council didn't care about the civilians, the families, or the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. They saw humans as nothing more than an obstacle, a race too dangerous and unpredictable to be allowed to expand further. In the command center of Aegis, the mood was tense. The silence that filled the room was suffocating. Every officer and every soldier knew the gravity of the situation. A message had already been sent to Earth, but the UEF had no ships near Viridian. It would take days, perhaps even weeks, before reinforcements could arrive. The Council had made its move, and humanity had been caught off guard. Ilara's fist clenched around the cold metal railing as she turned toward her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jonas Hale. He, too, had witnessed the destruction, his face pale and his eyes haunted. "Captain," he said softly, "we have to do something. The Council. They won't stop until we're wiped out." She nodded grimly. "We fight back, we don't give them a choice." But even as she spoke the words, she knew the UEF wasn't ready for a battle of this scale. Viridian had been a peaceful colony, not a military base. They had no fleet capable of matching the Council's armada. The best they could do was fight for time, time to rally the troops, time to organize, and time to bring Earth's full might to bear. Ilara turned and headed for the lift. She couldn't stand there helpless, she had to act. "I'm taking a shuttle to Viridian," she said as she stepped onto the lift. "We'll save who we can." Jonas hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Be careful, Captain. We don't know what kind of resistance they have on the ground." "I know," Ilara replied, her voice cold, "but we can't let them win without a fight." The descent to Viridian's surface felt like an eternity. The shuttle's engines hummed with an eerie rhythm as Ilara watched the planet grow larger through the windows. Below her, the remains of the colony were barely recognizable. The attack had been swift and brutal. As they neared the landing zone, Ilara could see smoke billowing from what had once been the central square. Buildings that had been home to millions were now reduced to smoldering wrecks. The shuttle's thrusters flared as it touched down, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The hatch opened, and Ilara stepped out onto the charred ground, her boots crunching on the remains of what had once been a thriving metropolis. The air smelled of burnt metal and ash, a sharp contrast to the once fresh scent of Viridian's forests. Her comms crackled in her ear. "Captain Turner, we have survivors. We've located a few hundred civilians in the eastern sector. We're setting up a defensive perimeter, but we don't know how long we can hold out." Ilara's heart tightened. A few hundred. Against the Council's might, it would be a miracle if any of them survived. But that didn't matter. She had a duty to protect them. "I'm on my way," she said, her voice firm. As she made her way through the wreckage, Ilara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. Viridian wasn't just another colony. It was a symbol of humanity's expansion into the stars. The people here had worked tirelessly to build something new, something better. And now all of that had been reduced to dust. She reached the survivors' camp, a ragtag group of civilians and soldiers who had managed to escape the initial bombardment. Some were injured, others too stunned to speak. The children huddled together, looking up at her with wide, fearful eyes. Ilara dropped to one knee in front of a young girl, no older than 10. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Ilara offered her a comforting smile, though her heart ached at the sight of so much suffering. "You're safe now," she said softly, brushing a lock of hair from the girl's face. "We'll get you to safety." The girl didn't respond, but her eyes seemed to soften, if only for a moment. Behind Alara, a soldier approached. "Captain, we've spotted more ships. The Council is sending reinforcements. We're going to need more firepower if we're going to stand a chance." Alara stood up, her mind racing. "We need to get these people to the shuttle, now." But just as she turned to give the order, a loud rumble shook the ground. A shockwave rippled through the air, followed by another explosion. A column of smoke rose into the sky, and Alara could see the massive shadow of the Council's battleship as it passed overhead, its weapon systems glowing ominously. "We don't have much time," Alara said, her voice now full of urgency. "Get them moving, now!" As the survivors began to scatter toward the shuttle, Alara took a moment to look back at the planet she had once called home. Viridian was lost, but she wouldn't let it be in vain. Humanity would rise from the ashes. She would make sure of it. Back on Aegis, the situation was growing more dire by the minute. Earth's leaders had received the message from Viridian, and though their shock was palpable, they knew what had to be done. The Galactic Council had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Alara's resolve echoed throughout the room as she stood before the UEF High Command. "We will make them pay," she said, her voice cold with determination. "We won't rest until every last one of them is brought to justice." The room fell silent. They all knew this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of humanity. The Council had made a deadly mistake, and humanity was ready to strike back. Alara was ready to lead them. The days after the attack on Viridian were a blur of chaos. Earth was in full mobilization mode, yet the weight of the loss still hung heavy in the air. The death toll from the Council's brutal assault had reached into the millions, but it was the utter devastation of humanity's first real taste of war that was hardest to bear. There was no denying it. Humanity had been caught off guard. The Galactic Council's fleets were vast, their technology far superior to anything Earth had ever developed. But now, with the burning remains of Viridian still fresh in their memories, humanity was waking up to a harsh reality. This was their war to win or lose. Captain Alara Turner stood in the war room of the UEF flagship Aegis, staring at the holographic display in front of her. The map of the galaxy showed the locations of all known Galactic Council military outposts and bases, and though it was still early in the conflict, one thing was already clear. Humanity was vastly outnumbered, but that wasn't going to stop them. It never had before. "Captain, we've got new intel from Earth," said Lieutenant Jonas Hale, his voice tight with urgency. "The UEF has managed to reverse engineer some of the Council's technology. They've got a new weapon ready to go, a battleship that could turn the tide in our favor." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying we've got something to match their firepower?" Jonas nodded. "Not just match it, surpass it. The UEF's engineers have been working around the clock on this. It's still in the prototype phase, but we've got something the Council won't expect." Alara's heart beat faster. She had seen the damage the Council's weaponry could do, and the thought of humanity having a weapon that could rival it filled her with a grim sense of purpose. This was their chance to strike back. "Let's see it," she said, her voice sharp with determination. Later that day, Alara stood in the UEF's engineering bay, watching as the engineers worked tirelessly on the prototype. The new ship, codenamed Ignis, was a marvel of human ingenuity. Its sleek design was a far cry from the clunky, inefficient warships humanity had used in the past. Ignis was built for speed, firepower, and precision, everything humanity needed to face the Council. Alara's eyes scanned the ship's specifications on the screen in front of her. It was equipped with a new type of fusion reactor, one that could generate far more power than anything currently available. The Ignis would be able to unleash devastating energy blasts, more than enough to tear through the Council's defenses. But it wasn't just the firepower that intrigued her, it was the ship's speed. The Ignis could outmaneuver anything the Council threw at them. "How soon can it be deployed?" Alara asked, turning to the lead engineer. "We're close, Captain," the engineer replied. "We need another day or two to finish testing, but we're ready for a trial run. If everything goes according to plan, we'll be able to launch a counteroffensive in a matter of days." Alara nodded, her mind racing. The Council might have the upper hand now, but soon that would change. Humanity had been underestimated for far too long. She had spent years in the UEF, fighting against the odds, and now she could feel it in her bones, the beginning of a new chapter. One where humanity would no longer be the prey, but the predator. The Aegis didn't waste any time. The next morning, Alara was at the helm of the flagship as it made its way toward the first target of the new campaign, a small, strategically significant council base on the outskirts of the galaxy. The Ignis would be joining them, and this mission would be its first test in real combat. The crew on the Aegis was tense but ready. Alara knew that this was more than just a mission, it was a message. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, and they were about to show the galaxy what they were made of. They were going to strike fast, hit hard, and leave no doubt that they weren't to be underestimated anymore. "Prepare for battle," Alara ordered as the crew scrambled to their stations. The Aegis and Ignis dropped out of warp space and entered the system of the council base. Alara's eyes narrowed as the base came into view, a heavily fortified installation surrounded by a fleet of warships. It would be a tough fight, but with the Ignis in the mix, Alara felt a surge of confidence. "Initiating offensive," she said, her voice steady. The battle started with a deafening roar as the Ignis unleashed its first barrage of energy blasts. The council ships were caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, their shields barely holding up against the concentrated fire. Alara watched as the Ignis darted around the council fleet, its speed unmatched by anything the enemy could field. The ship's energy cannons tore through enemy ships, sending them careening into each other in massive explosions. The Aegis was also in the thick of the fight, using its own weaponry to provide support. Alara's mind raced as she directed the battle. It was chaotic, brutal, and fast, but it was a fight humanity could win. The Ignis was proving to be the game-changer they needed. Every blast from its weapons hit with the force of a supernova, and the council ships that had once seemed invincible were now crumbling under the onslaught. Alara's heart pounded as she watched the battle unfold. They were winning. Humanity was showing the galaxy what they were capable of. But just as the council base seemed to be on the brink of destruction, Alara received an urgent message from Aegis's bridge. "Captain, we've got a problem. A council dreadnought just entered the system. It's bigger and more powerful than anything we've faced so far. If we don't get out of here now, we could be in serious trouble." Alara cursed under her breath. She had expected the council to retaliate with reinforcements, but this was beyond what she had anticipated. The dreadnought was the largest ship in the council's fleet, a juggernaut of unimaginable power. If they didn't act fast, the tables would turn, and humanity's first victory could turn into a devastating loss. "Full retreat," Alara ordered. "We can't take it on directly." "Get us out of here now?" But as the Aegis and Ignis prepared to make their escape, the dreadnought opened fire, its massive energy cannons firing in rapid succession. The ships shook as the blasts hit their shields, but they held strong, for now. "We need a diversion," Alara said, her mind racing. "The Ignis will lead the charge. We need to buy enough time for the Aegis to retreat." Jonas turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, that's too risky. We're talking about a dreadnought. If we don't get out now, we'll lose everything." But Alara didn't hesitate. "We do this for Viridian. We do this for everyone we lost. We buy the time and we win this war. We don't have a choice." With a deep breath, Alara gave the command. The Ignis shot forward, darting past the incoming fire from the dreadnought, its engines roaring as it sped toward the massive ship. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. Alara knew that the fate of this battle, and perhaps the entire war, depended on what happened next. The aftermath of the battle had left Alara Turner feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. The Ignis had survived the encounter with the Council's dreadnought, but not without cost. The ship had sustained heavy damage, and its engines were barely functional. The retreat had been barely successful, and as the fleet limped back to the safety of Earth's orbit, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were only just beginning to understand the true scale of the war they were facing. Aboard the Aegis, the crew was silent, each person lost in their thoughts. The battle had been a victory, yes, but it had come at a high price. The Council had retaliated with overwhelming force, and the dreadnought they had faced was just one of many ships in their vast fleet. Earth had only scratched the surface of the Council's military might. Alara sat at the command table, her fingers tapping against the cold surface as she reviewed the mission logs. Lieutenant Jonas Hale stood beside her, his eyes weary but filled with determination. "Captain, we've done what we can for the Ignis, but it's going to need a lot more repairs before it's operational again," Jonas said, his voice low. "We'll need to take it back to Earth for a complete overhaul." Elara nodded, rubbing her temples. I know, it's frustrating. We were so close, but at least we've shown them we can fight back. The council isn't going to sit idly by, though. They'll come after us with everything they've got. Jonas frowned. We're not prepared for that. We barely survived the last fight, and they've got a whole fleet of those dreadnoughts. That's why we're going to make sure they know we're not backing down, Elara said, her voice hardening with resolve. We need to turn this war in our favor. And to do that, we need more than just one ship. We need an entire fleet. Jonas looked at her, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. A fleet? Captain, we don't have the resources for something like that. Not yet. We will, Elara replied firmly. We'll get the resources. Humanity is united for the first time. Earth, the colonies, all of us, we're fighting for our survival. We have no choice but to win. We'll need to reach out to every human system, every colony, and rally them to our cause. Back on Earth, the news of the battle spread quickly, igniting a fire of resistance across the globe. The devastation on Viridian, coupled with the victory at the Council's base, had done something humanity had never experienced before, brought them together. The divisions that had once plagued Earth, political, cultural, and economic, were set aside in the face of a common enemy. The people of Earth, the colonies, and even the outlying systems rallied under the banner of the United Earth Federation. A summit was held in New York City, where Earth's leaders gathered to discuss the future of humanity's war effort. Elara, still aboard the Aegis, was informed that she had been chosen to represent the UEF in these critical negotiations. She was to lead the charge, to unite humanity's military and civilian forces into a single, unbreakable force capable of taking on the Galactic Council. The summit was tense. Earth's leaders, many of whom had never faced such a challenge, were nervous. Some argued for diplomacy, suggesting that a peaceful resolution with the Council was still possible. Others, including General Caldwell, the UEF's top military commander, were adamant that the only way forward was through total war. Elara, we need to strike fast, General Caldwell said, his voice sharp. We cannot afford to wait. The Council is already regrouping, and we've seen how ruthless they are. We need more ships, more soldiers. We need to show them that we're not afraid. Elara looked around the room, meeting the eyes of Earth's leaders. They were all waiting for her to speak. The pressure was immense, but she had no doubt in her mind. Humanity was at a crossroads, and the choices they made now would determine the fate of the entire species. General Caldwell is right, Elara said, standing tall and addressing the room. We cannot afford to hesitate. The Galactic Council sees us as nothing more than a threat to their power, and they will stop at nothing to destroy us. We have to take the fight to them. We can't wait for them to come to us again. She paused, letting her words sink in. But we cannot fight this war alone. Every human colony, every system must stand with us. We need their support, their resources. This is no longer a war for Earth alone. This is a war for humanity. The room was silent as the leaders absorbed her words. After a long moment, the president of the United Earth Federation, a tall woman named Lila Harper, spoke up. Elara, we're with you, she said, her voice firm. We'll gather every resource we can. If we can build a fleet capable of taking on the Council, we'll do it. But we need you to lead us. This won't be easy, but we'll follow you. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. As the Earth government mobilized its forces, Elara worked tirelessly to coordinate the efforts of the UEF and the various colonies. The Ignis was repaired and ready for combat once again, but Elara knew that one ship wouldn't be enough to tip the scales in humanity's favor. They needed an entire fleet, and they needed it fast. The new fleet, codenamed the Phoenix, would consist of dozens of ships, each outfitted with the same technology that powered the Ignis. Humanity's engineers worked around the clock to ensure that they could produce enough ships to match the Council's vast fleet. It wasn't just about building more ships. It was about creating a fleet that could move fast, hit hard, and strike with precision. The fleet would be made up of different types of vessels, destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, each serving a specific purpose in the coming battles. Elara spent hours poring over the plans for the fleet, making sure that every ship was prepared for the challenges they would face. But as much as the fleet was a symbol of humanity's power, Elara knew that it would take more than just ships to win this war. They needed soldiers, engineers, and leaders who could think on their feet, who wouldn't hesitate when the battle was on the line. As the fleet was built, Alara made sure to reach out to the survivors of the first battle, the brave soldiers and civilians who had fought beside her on Viridian. Many of them had lost everything, and their spirits had been broken. But Alara knew that they, too, had a place in this new war. They had been the first to feel the Council's wrath, and now they were the ones who would show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. With the Phoenix fleet finally assembled, Alara stood at the front of the flagship Aegis once again, gazing out into space. The stars were cold and distant, but Alara could feel the fire of humanity's determination burning bright. They were ready. The Ignis, now part of a fleet larger than any humanity had ever known, would lead the charge. Jonas Hale, standing beside her, smiled. "Ready, Captain," Alara nodded. "Ready for whatever comes next." The time for hesitation had passed. The Council had made its move, and now humanity was going to make theirs. "Let's go," Alara said, her voice steady. The fleet jumped to light speed, heading straight for the heart of the Galactic Council's domain. Humanity was coming, and nothing would stand in their way. The fleet, now fully assembled, drifted in the cold expanse of space. It was a sight Alara Turner had never imagined she would witness. An armada of humanity's finest ships, each one a testament to what could be achieved when a species united for survival. But despite the overwhelming numbers, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were still outmatched. The Council's military might was vast, and their dreadnoughts were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The Aegis hung in the center of the fleet, with Alara standing on its command deck, staring out at the cluster of ships arrayed before her. The Ignis, now repaired and upgraded, sat proudly among them, its sleek form a symbol of humanity's resilience. But even with the power of the Phoenix fleet, Alara knew that they were walking into enemy territory. The Council wouldn't give up without a fight. "Captain, we've received a communication from the Council," Jonas Hale said, his voice tight with tension. "They're demanding our immediate surrender. They claim that humanity's resistance is futile." Alara's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let them think that. We'll give them a reason to regret underestimating us." She turned to the crew. "Prepare the fleet for battle. We've made it this far, and we're not turning back now." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. The tension on the Aegis was palpable, but there was also a sense of purpose. For the first time since the attack on Viridian, Alara could see the hope in their eyes. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to win. Days passed as the fleet made its way deeper into Council-controlled space. The journey was long, and every moment felt like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. The ships were prepared, but there was still a sense of uncertainty. Alara spent most of her time in the war room, analyzing tactics and reviewing the latest intelligence. Jonas and the rest of the senior officers were with her, helping to refine their strategies. "We've got an update on the Council's fleet," Jonas said, tapping a few commands into the holo display. "They've concentrated their forces in the Xeron system. It's heavily fortified with multiple dreadnoughts and several battle stations in orbit." "It's going to be a tough fight, Captain." Alara studied the display, her eyes narrowing as she examined the data. The Council was clearly preparing for a final stand. They knew humanity was coming, and they were making sure to fortify their position. "We'll need to strike fast and hard," she said, her voice calm but determined. "We can't afford to let them regroup. Once we hit their fleet, we need to keep them on the defensive, no time for hesitation." "But Captain," Jonas said, "they've got us outnumbered. If we go in head first, we could lose everything." Alara met his gaze. "We've already lost everything once before. This time we fight to win." Jonas nodded, but Alara could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't the only one feeling it. The entire fleet was about to face the Council's full force, and there was no way to know what the outcome would be. But Alara had seen humanity fight against impossible odds before. They had survived the attack on Viridian, and they had survived the battles since. This time they wouldn't just survive. This time they would win. The fleet arrived at the Xeron system just after dawn. The stars glowed brightly in the distance, casting an eerie light on the black void of space. The Aegis and its sister ships dropped out of warp, forming up in tight formation as they prepared for the assault. Alara stood at the command table, her hands gripping the sides as she scanned the enemy's position. The Council's fleet was waiting for them, its massive dreadnoughts positioned at the center of their defensive line. Smaller destroyers and cruisers flanked the larger ships, forming a near-impenetrable wall. Alara's heart raced. She had seen this kind of fleet before, the kind of force that could obliterate any hope of survival, but she wasn't going to back down now. "We go in full throttle," she said, her voice steady. "We'll take the battle to them before they can make their move." The officers around her nodded, and the fleet began to move, cutting through space with precision and speed. Alara's mind raced with plans and contingencies. They would hit the Council hard, strike fast, and take out their most dangerous assets before the dreadnoughts could engage the fleet in full force. It was risky, but it was the only way they had a chance to succeed. As they approached the Council fleet, the first shots rang out. The Ignis led the charge, its engines roaring as it darted through the enemy lines. Energy blasts flew past it, narrowly missing as it cut between the larger ships, launching its own barrage of fire. The Aegis followed close behind, with the rest of the fleet in tow. The battle erupted around them. Explosions rocked space as the Council's ships fired back, their weapons tearing through the black void. But humanity wasn't intimidated. The Phoenix fleet was smaller, but it was faster and more agile. The ships zipped through the chaos, hitting the Council's ships where it hurt, disabling engines, crippling shields, and taking out key systems. Alara's heart pounded as she watched the battle unfold. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of every decision pressing down on her. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight to prove that humanity wasn't to be trifled with. "We've got a breach in the left flank," shouted a tactical officer from across the room. "The enemy's pushing through." Alara's eyes snapped to the hollow display. One of the Council dreadnoughts had broken through their lines, cutting across the fleet with its massive energy cannons firing relentlessly. The Aegis was taking heavy fire, but it was holding steady. The Ignis was already engaging the dreadnought, its energy beams blasting against the larger ship's hull. "Hold your position," Alara barked. "We can't let them break through." She watched as the Ignis danced around the dreadnought, its cannons firing in rapid succession. The smaller ship's speed and precision were its greatest assets, but even with that advantage, it was only a matter of time before the dreadnought's overwhelming firepower would tear through it. "Alara, the Ignis is losing power," Jonas said urgently. "They're being overwhelmed." "We can't let them go down," Alara said, her voice tight with determination. "Full speed ahead, all ships focus fire on the dreadnought. We're not leaving them behind." The fleet responded, charging forward in unison. Alara watched as the Aegis and the other ships coordinated their fire, taking down the dreadnought's shields and finally breaching its hull. A massive explosion lit up the darkness of space as the dreadnought's core detonated, sending debris scattering in all directions. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. The remaining Council ships were regrouping, their fire becoming more concentrated and vicious. "All ships engage at maximum power," Alara ordered. "We finish this now." The final phase of the battle was chaos. Ships collided, weapons fire exploded all around them, and the black void of space was illuminated by flashes of destruction. Alara's hands were steady on the controls as she directed the Aegis through the battle, coordinating the fleet's movements with precision. But even with the odds shifting in humanity's favor, the Council wasn't backing down. They fought with a desperation that only came when a species knew it was losing. Alara's eyes narrowed as she saw the last of the Council's forces. Their final dreadnought, the largest of them all, loomed ahead, its weapons charging for a final, desperate attack. The entire fleet had gathered for one last strike. Alara took a deep breath. "This is it. All ships focus on the dreadnought. Let's end this." The Aegis surged forward, its weapons firing with unrelenting force. The fleet followed in close formation, pouring everything they had into the final assault. For a moment, it felt as though time itself slowed down. The dreadnought's weapons fired, but the fleet's fire was faster, stronger. The final shot hit its mark, and the dreadnought exploded in a burst of blinding light, its massive frame breaking apart in the vacuum of space. The battle was over. The silence in space after the battle was deafening. The vastness of the Xeron system had returned to its eerie calm, save for the debris that floated aimlessly, remnants of the fierce confrontation. The remains of the Council's once mighty fleet drifted, scattered like broken toys. The dreadnoughts, those monstrous symbols of the Galactic Council's power, had been destroyed, their hulking frames now nothing more than husks. Humanity had triumphed, but the cost was undeniable. Alara Turner stood on the bridge of the Aegis, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out into the empty expanse. The battle had been hard fought, and they had lost many good men and women, but they had achieved what had once seemed impossible. The Council's stranglehold on the galaxy had been shattered, and the Phoenix fleet had proved humanity's worth. Captain Jonas Hale's voice broke through the silence. He stood a few steps behind her, his face grim. "We've accounted for all the ships. The Council's main fleet has been completely wiped out." Alara didn't turn to face him. "And the casualties?" "We lost 3 ships, Captain. The Phoenix fleet took heavy losses, but we've already begun recovery. The Ignis? It's still in one piece, but it's not going anywhere for a while." Alara exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the loss settle over her. The victory felt hollow. She had known that this battle was a turning point, but the reality of war, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, was something no amount of preparation could have prepared her for. "We've won the battle," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But the war isn't over. The Council still controls the core worlds, and they'll regroup. We need to keep pushing." Jonas didn't respond immediately. He understood the gravity of her words. The Council, even in defeat, was a formidable opponent. They wouldn't just let humanity go unchallenged. And yet, in their first real engagement, humanity had proven it could hold its ground. Alara turned to face him then. "We'll need to gather more intelligence, find out where the Council is retreating to and what resources they have left." "We're on it," Jonas confirmed. "The Aegis and the remaining ships are in position to begin searching the system for survivors. We'll also set up reconnaissance to track their movements." "Good," Alara nodded, her resolve hardening once more. "We push forward, no more hesitation. If we stop now, we lose everything." Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. The entire planet, humanity's home, was in shock. People poured into the streets, celebrating the triumph over the Galactic Council. It was a moment of unity unlike anything the Earth had ever seen. In every city, from the towering skyscrapers of New York to the peaceful hills of the French countryside, humanity stood together in the aftermath of the first true war against an alien force. But Alara knew that this wasn't the time for celebration. Not yet. The victory was important, yes, but it was only one step in a much larger war. The Council had been dealt a blow, but they were far from defeated. Humanity's strength, its will to survive, had been proven. But Alara knew the cost of that strength. The galaxy was vast, and the Council's reach extended far beyond what they had just encountered. The Aegis was docked at Earth's orbital station, and Alara had been summoned to Earth Command for a debriefing. The atmosphere in the command center was tense, even though the victory had been secured. Everyone knew that the real fight was still ahead. As Alara entered the command room, the room fell silent. The faces of Earth's leaders, military officials, diplomats, and strategists were all turned toward her. Among them stood President Lila Harper, who had been a steady voice of leadership throughout the conflict. Alara stood at attention, her hands at her sides. "Ma'am, sir, we've secured the Xeron system and eliminated the Council's primary fleet. The Phoenix fleet is intact, though we have suffered heavy casualties. The remaining ships are being repaired as we speak." Harper nodded, her face grim. "We've been monitoring your progress. Humanity has made a statement today, Captain. We've proven that we are no longer just an afterthought in the galaxy. The Council will have to answer for what they did to Viridian and the other colonies." Alara nodded, but there was a weight in her heart that she couldn't shake. The loss of so many lives, her own people, her friends, still hung heavy on her. "Captain Turner," President Harper continued, "you've done what no one thought possible, but we're facing an enemy that won't just retreat. The Council will regroup and they'll come at us harder than before. We need a plan for the next phase of the war." Alara met the President's gaze, her voice steady. "We push forward. We strike the Council's strongholds, hit their production worlds. If we cripple their ability to rebuild, we'll have the upper hand. They may have been able to retreat for now, but they can't rebuild their entire fleet without resources. We strike fast and we hit hard." Harper considered her words for a long moment before nodding. "I agree. But we need to gather more support. We can't do this alone. The other galactic factions will have to choose sides, ours or the Council's. We need to make sure humanity's allies are ready for the next fight." "Understood," Alara said. "We'll start reaching out to our allies immediately. The more ships we have, the better. We'll also begin work on new technologies," a scientist from Earth's defense sector spoke up. We've seen what the Council's ships are capable of. We need to match that firepower. The fusion reactors powering the Ignis are a step in the right direction, but we need to go further. Alara's mind was already racing, processing the new plans. There was so much to do, so many decisions to make. The Council wasn't going to back down, and neither would humanity. They had made it this far. Now they had to make sure they finished what they had started. Weeks passed, and humanity's war effort ramped up. The Aegis and the remaining ships of the Phoenix fleet were fully repaired, and more ships were being constructed every day. New alliances were formed with other alien species that had long feared the Council's reign. Humanity's military might grew, but so did the stakes. Alara was stationed aboard the Aegis, now serving as the flagship of the United Earth Federation's forces. She was constantly in meetings, making decisions, strategizing. But despite the hustle and bustle around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Council was out there, somewhere, regrouping. They were waiting for humanity to make the first move. The fleet's next target was a Council stronghold on the planet Saros. A fortified planet that held a critical resource, the Council needed to rebuild their military, a rare metal found deep beneath its surface. If humanity could capture Saros, they would gain control over the very thing the Council needed to fight back. The battle to take Saros was long and brutal. The Council had fortified the planet's surface with advanced weaponry, and their fleet was waiting in orbit. But Alara had a plan. They would strike hard and fast, overwhelming the Council's forces before they could fully respond. The Aegis led the charge once again, with the Ignis and several other ships following closely behind. As the fleet dropped out of warp and entered the planet's orbit, the battle began. Explosions filled the air as weapons fire lit up the sky. The Council's ships fought back fiercely, but humanity had the upper hand. "We've broken through their defenses, Captain," Jonas Hale reported from the bridge. "The surface forces are in position. We're going to secure the mining facility." Alara nodded, her focus unshaken. "Move quickly. We can't give them time to regroup." The surface battle was intense, but humanity's resolve proved stronger than the Council's. The mining facility fell, and Saros was soon under humanity's control. With the critical resources in hand, humanity had taken another step forward. The Council, now severely weakened, had been forced into retreat. The tide of the war had shifted in humanity's favor. But Alara knew that the end was still far from certain. There would be more battles to fight, more victories to claim, and losses to endure. But one thing was clear. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would never back down. They would fight, and they would win. Alara stood at the helm of the Aegis, looking out into the stars. The galaxy was vast, but humanity was stronger than ever before. They had struck back with fire, and now the fire would burn bright for all to see. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Alara felt hope, real, unshakable hope for the future.